Good afternoon, everybody. We apologize for the little delay. As you may see from the people present here and from the Skype over there, there is a little change in and from my presence here, there is a little change in the arrangement because Mr. Yang Tianli eventually did not make it and could not come to Prague to chair this panel. For the beginning, I will introduce all the panelists. They are slightly different from what you may have in your program. And then we will start our discussion. So I will start from the right side. On the further right, there is Mr. Xu Sijian, who is currently president of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. Mr. Xu is a political scientist. He is also an author or editor of a volume dedicated to Xi Jinping and his role, and he does research in Academia Sinica in Taiwan. On my right side, there is Mr. Chan Ping. Mr. Chan Ping is a well-known journalist and commentator of current affairs from the People's Republic of China. He worked first in the People's Republic of China, then he moved to Hong Kong. He worked in Taiwan for some time, in Malaysia, and currently he is based in Germany. Besides being a journalist and, as I said, commentator of current affairs, he is also a writer and poet. And on my left side, we have Mr. Martin Hala, who is a sinologist, a graduate from Charles University, who studied also in China, United States. He worked for many years in media or for media in Asia, and currently he is director of the Synopsis Project. Some of you may know the Synopsis Project. I also welcome our co-panelists on the Skype. There is, first of all, Mr. Yang Tianli, who is the president of the Initiative for China. He is very active in exile circles promoting democracy in China. He's educated as a scientist, and he also spent some time in Chinese prison before he left China, and now he lives in the United States. And our last guest is Mr. Guo Menghui, who is a Chinese entrepreneur, a very controversial person who is recently living in the United States, disclosing cases of corruption and misbehavior in the top party echelons, and who is very much followed for his disclosures about how the system works. Myself, my name is Olga Lomova. I am a teacher at Charles University in Prague, and I'm also chair of the board of ACA Media, and which is an organization that created Synopsis. So we very closely collaborate with Martin Hala. Our arrangement will be as follows. I will first ask all the panelists to make a short opening statement, something like 5 minutes. Then we will ask some questions between ourselves, and then I will give the floor also to the audience to ask questions. So maybe I start again from Mr. Xu to make his opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It is indeed my honor to be able to be in this Forum 2000 and this panel. This is my first time participating in Forum 2000. Originally, according to the program you have on with you, I'm supposed to be the second panel, the foreign expansion. But since this panel originally had only 2 panelists, and the host asked me if I'm willing to be in this one, and since I was a political scientist studying Chinese politics for a long time, so it will be my pleasure. So today I would like to talk about one concept that I came up with in my previous edited volume in Chinese talking about Xi Jinping's rule. My idea is that after Xi Jinping came to power, in the past about 5 to 10 years in the political science circle of Chinese politics, there is this very popular concept talking about Chinese politics, that is authoritarian resilience. As if the Chinese communist regime is a very resilient and capable authoritarian regime. But I think after Xi Jinping came to power, intendedly or unintendedly, that authoritarian resilience is vanishing. So that's vanishing resilience is the core concept I would like to bring up. It's vanishing because of the following reasons. First of all, the CCP regime was being able to resilient was because on the top, it's a collective leadership system. When we talk about collective leadership, we're talking about the balance of power among political factions. Through a periodical, not a genuine election, but a compromise between factions about the leadership arrangement. But that has been broken. That tacit agreement, consensus, or rule has been broken. I think that this not totally came from Xi Jinping's personal will, but it actually because the way Xi Jinping was arranged as the heir was itself a compromise between factions. However, there were certain people that was not willing to follow that consensus between factions, and I think has been made known to the public. Bo Xilai was one of them. And even after the previous party congress, there were very obvious power struggle and allegedly at least 2 attempts of coup. And that reflects the lack of stability of that consensus. So I think from the very beginning, Xi Jinping was put in the place of a zero-sum game between himself and the opposing political forces. So from the very beginning, he was not able to keep a balanced power between the factions. So only choice he had was to concentrate the power within his own hand with how many? 13 titles that he had already as the leader of different small leading groups. But even that was not enough. That reflects the nature of the fragility of that kind of regime. So that's the first reason why the resilience is vanishing. The second reason is originally, since the economy was developing, there was a relatively more relaxed atmosphere between the regime and the civil society. So we witnessed a period of time that various organizations of civil society were booming. However, this also came to an end since Xi Jinping came to power. He emphasized a lot of ideological rejuvenation. I think Changping will talk about that. And he had several waves of suppression or oppression over the civil society groups. And some of them were not even politically sensitive. For example, the feminist groups, they were advocating equal rights for public restrooms. And it's difficult to imagine how politically sensitive that can be. But they were arrested. And of course, labor rights group and lawyers, these are another famous incident. There was this 709 big arrests around the nation. So that happens across the provinces, reflects it's a national level coordinated suppression of the regime of lawyers. And this repression over civil society even has its ramification of international relations. Now China has this overseas NGO management law. And there is one NGO activist from Taiwan, Mr. Li Mingzhe, who has also been arrested, so to speak, but actually originally was not formally arrested, was disappeared in March earlier this year. And not long ago, after several months of the inquiry from his family in Taiwan and the Taiwanese government, there was no formal reaction or response from the Chinese government. Eventually, there was a trial on the court, and his designated lawyer said he gives up the right to defend for him. So there was such a trial, but the sentence was not given yet. So we're still waiting for the results. And Li Mingzhe's wife was there, and his wife was not willing to recognize the legitimacy or legality of this whole process. So that kind of, as I said, this originally was a domestic law within China, but its external ramification has been made very clear. So this suppression or repression over civil society also destroys the tacit agreement between the civil society and the regime. Again, originally during the Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin era, there were actually a lot of informal or tacit cooperation between the NGOs and the local governments in helping the regime to improve its governance. So that was, so to speak, a kind of honeymoon area, but that period has finished too. So that's the second reason why the resilience is vanishing. And other reasons I think other panelists may talk about, that is, I think, the expansionist assertiveness of China around its nation has also, I think, created a lot of trouble for itself. It created an unfriendly atmosphere, international atmosphere for China to develop. So there are a lot of pushback to the regime. That creates some kind of beneficial external environment for the regime. So due to these reasons, I think we're talking about 19th Party Congress. It's a very volatile political condition right now. I think maybe our special guest, Guo Wengui, may testify to that condition. But there can be some other black swan this year or next year, particularly because of the fragility of the economic condition. It's another uncertainty. But of course, still, China is a big country. The scale of its economy is huge. It's still developing. But at the same time, because of all this political uncertainty and its together with expansion worldwide, a global expansion. So I think it becomes more and more worrisome, particularly on the cross-strait relations with Taiwan. We are facing, because of the domestic political uncertainty within China, we sometimes worried very much that if China runs into some kind of domestic problem, there is always this possibility that the leadership may divert to some external tension, and Taiwan can be easy target for the Chinese regime. So that's a long-term worry for us. I think I'll just stop here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for summarizing the basic views about the approaching 19th Congress and the situation in China on the eve of the Congress. Our second speaker is Mr. Zhang Ping or Chang Ping?
Chang Ping.
Chang Ping. Mr. Chang Ping, who is a journalist and I think will speak mainly from the point of view of internal situation and media and the freedom of speech.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your coming, and thank you for having my voice here. which is not good at English speaking, but still trying to communicate. So first, let me quote Kazuo Ishiguro, the latest Nobel Prize for Literature laureate, said in an interview in 2015 with the Huffington Post, quote, I feel it's appropriate as a novelist, as opposed to a nonfiction writer, to take a step back and acknowledge that these are recurring patterns in the human condition. You will see them repeated all through history, unquote. I think he hates to be a journalist, but as a journalist and a commentator who has been watching the current affairs in China for almost 3 decades, I am proud to say I have been treating my writing in the same way as he does. I mean, I always take a step back and say what's happening in a long-term view, to put the events in a long-term perspective, to explain to my readers and audience how these events fit into the history. So by that way, I will tell something. Yeah. First, I would say basically, I agree with Professor Hu's sought for reviews in Chinese society movement. But some of my views might be different through different angles. First, I would say by a long-term perspective, something striking us, surprising us, not new at all. It seems they're new, but in my view, they have never veered off course. First, let me say media censorship, or the distortion of information. Yeah, I know everyone in this room knows very well President Xi Jinping has been placing more and more restrictions on the media and the internet in recent years, also on the academic press. The censorship, I would say the censorship in structure is integrated and well coordinated, ranging from industry access, operating permits, and certification to shadowing controls on the personal and professional lives of communist cadres, the workflow of news censorship, the financial penalties. This system came under strong challenges when the internet first entered China, but ultimately proved resilient after thoughtful tinkering, and now manages the internet in a highly effective way. Second, let me say the power struggle. The power struggle, so dramatic. It is worth watching. But power struggle do not necessarily bring about meaningful change and reform. We have seen this happen both in like Leon Trotsky's fight for revolutionary direction in the Soviet Union, or in the so-called Night of the Long Knives in Hitler era in Germany. Close to home, Mao Zedong first won the popular applause for executing corrupt senior officials Liu Qingshan and Zhang Zishan, but in the end, the executions served only to establish his dictatorship. The third, let me say the dictatorship or the tyranny. As discouraging as this revelation may be, no one should harbor the illusion that they actually represent anything new from the anti-rightist campaign, the Cultural Revolution, to Tiananmen massacre, and today's stability maintenance or rules by secret police. Chinese Communist Party rule has been both consistent and continuous. Do I have time? No? Okay. Yeah. Actually, this is the first part I want to say. Later, maybe I will talk about what is ongoing change. It's changing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for the beginning. If I understand correctly, you summarize the effectiveness of censorship as an institutional and system, as a whole system of control, very highly effective. You also mentioned the power struggle, which eventually we cannot expect anything radically new from the power struggle. And third, you raised an example of recent Chinese history showing that the power position and the, well, let's say power position of the Communist Party is consistent all over the years, despite all the changes which were going on in China. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Our third speaker is Martin Haller. Let him say a few words for the beginning.
Maybe just a few words. We have a lot of distinguished guests who are in much better position to talk about the developments inside the People's Republic. I will probably just say that the upcoming 19th Congress of the Communist Party of China will mark the middle of the tenure of President and General Secretary Xi Jinping. This tenure is indeed bringing China in new directions. It's a very different direction from the one that was essentially established by Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s. We have seen very significant course corrections or changes in both the domestic and foreign policies of mainland China. And we have seen in all of these areas a tightening of the regime, closing of the space that until recently has been relatively open. So this domestic situation in China is in contrast with the image that China has been trying to project internationally. And that's my main point, that At the time when China is trying to present itself as a more open society, that is ready to deal with the outside world on very open terms, we're actually seeing quite the opposite happening inside the country. So there's a bit of a discrepancy between the domestic situation and the international image. And I would say that it's probably nowhere as apparent as in this country, where recently the changes in foreign policy orientation has brought the Czech Republic to much closer relationship with China, without much of a domestic discussion about what that actually entails for, in many areas for the future of the Czech Republic. I think it would be good to have a little bit more discussion about what contemporary China looks like and what this new strategic partner of the Czech Republic is fundamentally about. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now turn to our participants in distance. I would like to ask Mr. Yang Tianli to say a few words, just opening remarks on the topic of the approaching 19th Congress and internal situation in China. Just up to 5 minutes, please.
Yes, first I want to apologize for not being able to be there, which caused some inconvenience, as you all can see now. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. I get to the topic. I want to briefly touch 3 questions. First, what goals Xi Jinping is trying to achieve at the Party Congress? Number 2, what his party line his political line that he will implement after the Party Congress? Third, what crises are facing him? First of all, the goals that Xi Jinping is trying to achieve. Number 1, he not only wants to cement the power that he concentrated successfully in his hand in the past 5 years, but also elevate his status as the core of the CCP leadership and raise his place in the history by enshrining a signature ideology with his name into a party charter. Number 2, he will try to put as many as his henchmen in the very important positions, not only for strengthening his power, consolidating his position as a paramount leader, but also for him to be relatively easy to implement his political line. Party Congress, the party line that he wants to implement, which will manifest his core value, if there's any. Number 4, he will try to lay a power structure and foundation for him to go beyond the 10 years. He has already clearly shown his ambition to go beyond the second term, to stay in power after the second term ends. I think these are 3 goals he wants to achieve through the Party Congress. And the number 2 question is, what is his political line that he wants to implement after the Party Congress? And that, I think, is a more important question than the first one. I think what he wants to do is very, very simply put, will take approach, it's a middle way approach of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. What he wants to do is to correct all the problems of the so-called crony capitalism started by Deng Xiaoping. So his era will be radically different from that of Deng Xiaoping and his followers, namely Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. Number 3, the crisis facing him. China's politics still has a nature of core politics. In the past 5 years, the Chinese politics has created many demoted princes, like Bo Xilai, Lin Jihua, Sun Zhengcai, and even Li Keqiang and Hu Chunhua. They're still not having serious problem. They're demoted princes. So this can be potential challenge to Xi Jinping. If there's any crisis, these people can banner as the opposition to Xi Jinping. Number two, the officials have been spoiled in the past 30 years of crony capitalism. They're so corrupted. Now Xi Jinping take the new line, which actually break the tacit promise that Deng Xiaoping made to the officials many years ago that, no matter how they corrupt, as long as they do not do anything oppose this regime, as long as they are loyal to this regime, it will be okay. I think Xi Jinping is breaking that tacit promise. So officials may not have incentive or motive to passionately support him. And the second, we know, the private entrepreneurs are just turning back on Xi Jinping. A lot of things happens as the information we collect from China show that Xi Jinping is trying to nationalize private capitals. There's a division between the ruling structure and the capitalists, and even the middle class. I think Guo Wengui's example is just an extreme example of this division. And number four, economic crisis. Xi Jinping's political line only dealt another blow to the already downturning economy in China. If there's an economic crisis, anything can happen. Everything will lay bare: social conflict, people's grief. And number four is external crisis. I will leave people to ask a question about foreign relations with Martin and somebody else. And I want to end here, but very briefly conclude. Xi Jinping wants to go beyond the 10 years, the second term. And he has to overcome the crisis that I just laid out. And at the end of the second term, he has to try to find out a new mandate for him to continue in the power. I think the question we must ask, what will his new mandate be? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Our last speaker to give a brief overview of his opinion is Mr. Guo Wengui. I understand that he speaks only Chinese and must be interpreted. Am I right? Or can he speak English?
I will translate for him.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So, please, Mr. Guo Wengui, say a few opening remarks. We will be back to you later in the panel. So, this is not your only opportunity to speak to us.
他说：“你这个5分钟的开场白啊。”
我明白了，谢谢，非常荣幸参与今天的大会，非常抱歉我的英文讲得不好。
It's a great honor for me to participate. I'm very sorry that my English is not proficient enough to speak at this panel.
这个关于现在刚才谈到的话题呢，我想简单的说，大家呢都通过自己的专业和通过各种现象进行了判断，但是我想在这里说的事情。 是中国没有 countries 的19大，中国就没有 countries， 这个是个错误的理解。中国的19大将真正的影响全世界，而且是黑暗的。
The previous panelists talked about the party congress from their own angles, from their own studies. But I want to tell everyone here, the communist. 没有什么？你刚才说没有？
它没有真正的所谓的 countries 的会议，它不叫 countries， 中国没有人大，没有。
Okay. So the party's Congress is not really Congress in the sense represent the ordinary party members. It's no Congress at all. But after the Congress, China will enter dark age.
我想在这里呢，用我自己亲身的经验和我参与过过去的所有的政治的内部的这个不可向外事宣布的，我让外界无法知道的一些活动，来告诉大家，世界将进入一个非常非常危险的动荡的时期。
I want to speak on my own experience working inside the system. And with a lot of untold story to show people that the world, because of CCP, will enter very turmoil era.
这个我所揭发的 BGY 这个项目，蓝金黄还有3F 这个美国，这是在全世界都在谈论中国经济发展的时候，这个盗国贼们，中国的盗国贼们。布下的给世界的一个巨大的一个炸弹。如果大家不去重视这些具体的问题，我们要靠分析的话，我们会非常非常的危险。
I have recently talked about CCP's BGY plan and 3F against US. BGY, namely blue, gold, and yellow. Of this plan, as people talk about economic growth in China, was conceived by CCP to influence, even control the whole world. If we don't pay enough attention to this issue, we will be risking our situation.
然后呢，我说是台湾和香港，还有现在的新疆和西藏，以及现在热点的这几个地区，在未来的3到5年会进入非常非常危险和一个巨大的挑战的时期。
So Taiwan, Hong Kong, including Tibet and Xinjiang, will enter a very dangerous time. It will be very challenging.
我会用事实向大家来证明这些事情对我们的威胁和对我们大家造成的每个人都具有切身利益的危害。这就是今天我要开始想讲的，祝大会成功。
And I will later, through telling facts, to show people the threat that the CCP is posing to the whole world. That's my beginning. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have these introductory opinions, somehow some of them overlapping, some of them complementing each other. I would ask each panelist one more question, and then I will give the floor to the audience to answer your questions. We could see that there is a shared opinion that the Party Congress to be held soon in China will somehow cement the power of Xi Jinping, or at least it will be an attempt to cement the power of Xi Jinping. And at the same time, there were several critical moments, several aspects of his power which are regarded as let's say, undermining his position or undermining the position of the Communist Party, or maybe I am wrong. So whether undermining or cementing even further. So maybe I would just first ask a question to the panelists, and please answer very briefly. Do you think that after the Congress, Xi Jinping will be really strengthened and will be his power will be unchallenged just after the Congress? Just very briefly, Mr. Xu, please.
It is a difficult question to answer because it depends on what do you mean by stabilized and unchallenged. I mean, any leader in any political systems are challenged by different forces within the system every single day. Even Mao Zedong were facing challenges. So we're talking about extent. I think Xi Jinping will not be exempted from internal challenges. Although in the short run, maybe no one can replace him for his leadership position unless there's a coup. But if we're talking about ordinary condition, that scenario is relatively remote. However, that does not mean that his leadership is unchallenged. For example, you have competing bureaucracies, or even within the military, you have competing services for limited resources, not only limited resources, but when they are building up their bureaucratic or service power, they're actually competing for different strategic goals for the country. So I think that will be that will keep happening because when Xi Jinping is assuming so many positions of leadership, actually his attention to each of them will be worn thin. So under that different framework, you have bureaucrats or systems working on its own, and they are competing for each other. So it's almost physically impossible for a great leadership to pay attention to all the details. Because of that, the nature of that, the more concentrated the power she has, the more challenging the condition will be. So that is my logic.
And it reminds us of the Ming dynasty emperor, the Ming Taizu, who concentrated all the power. And that it was an analogous story in Chinese history. Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you, Martin, somehow comment on the position or the immediate outcome of the Congress and perhaps further consequences of the results?
Well, to me it seems that all signs suggest that the Congress will consolidate Xi Jinping's power, at least in the short term. Of course, in the long term, some of his policies might unravel because they are rather ambitious. So in the long term, it might be a different story. But in the short-term perspective, I think it will be just consolidation of his power, unless, of course, Mr. Kuo Wen-kuei presents some further revelations that might upset the Congress in the next few weeks.
Okay, okay. I understand that Mr. Champing is also thinking about this question, but more in an international context, or?
Yeah, my answer is it depends on how the rest of the world react to China's development. Now we can say on the global level, we can say increasing trend that the whole world bends to China. China's wishes as its economic power. Yes, that will strengthen Xi Jinping's and the CCP's power. Yeah, and not only to Chinese, to inner China, but also, as Mr. Kuo Wen-kuei suggested, to the whole world. That would be a big problem. Yeah.
Okay, we will have the following panel will be more dedicated to the international impact of China and well, the whole issue of democratization or withdrawal from democracy under the Chinese influence. So we are not going to discuss these international matters anymore, but maybe a comment could be made by Mr. Yang Jianli regarding the civil society in China. There were many hopes hopes put on civil society in China, not unlike the ideas of civil society which were developed by late President Václav Havel. And I know that there was really a booming civil society in China, which is now being suppressed. Mr. Yang Jianli is himself, let's say, part of the civil society. So maybe you could say a few comments on the future of civil society as the bearer of possible, let's say, democratization in the People's Republic of China?
Oh, thank you for the question. Actually, I leave the answer to your previous question for later, for other questions. But now I want to answer your question first. Yeah, the civil society has been cracked down upon in the past 5 years to a degree and a scale and seen in past 20 years. And I think even with this hardship, the civil society is still very resilient in many ways. But still, we need 4 conditions for us to grow and eventually to effect a real change in China. Number 1 is general discontent with the government from the people, which is existing. It's not only existing, but mounting. The second is a viable opposition movement, which has not yet there yet. And that's something we try to do. Then there are a lot of protests, right defending activities. We try to, form ourselves strong civil society forces, but still we don't have an overall viable democracy movement existing in China. That's something we have to work on. Number 3 condition, necessary condition, is the split of the leadership. That's something you just asked, which I think Mr. Guo Wengui has done a great deal to contribute in this regard, but we don't see the clear, obvious effect yet. But I think, the crack is in the making, and eventually they will crack open. The number 4 condition is the international support and the recognition of the Chinese democracy movement, not only overseas, but also inside. So I just very briefly summarize the 4 necessary conditions we should work to try to make exist at the same time, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will give floor to Mr. Guo Wengui in a moment. But before we do so, I think it would be good for the audiences to ask their questions, and then we will continue with Mr. Guo Wengui. Yes? So now I think you have a sort of a space outlined here by our speakers, and I welcome everybody to ask your questions and raise your comments to the situation in China, which you could, of course, you follow it beyond this panel, but you could also follow up the questions or what was said here.
Hello, my name is Michal. I'm a tour guide here in Prague, and my question regards human rights. I want to ask, is there any way in which the Congress being in place and the situation being volatile and all that, is there any way in which this can play out well for human rights in China? And is there any way for the global community and Western countries in particular to do something, use this somehow to promote human rights in China? I don't necessarily mean only civil society in terms of democratic opposition and stuff like that, but just people being released from prisons and things like that. Thank you.
Do you want to answer this question? Yeah.
Directly to Mr. Guo Wengui.
No, I don't think it was.
No. It was not addressing Mr. Guo Wengui. We will give him the floor after this internal discussion here. Yeah, is it
okay? Okay. So we just wait. Both
yeah.
Guo
Yes,
and
please.
myself.
Yes, please.
To answer this question, I think the upcoming Congress, if anything, will only make the human rights situation worse. It already has, but a lot of people have been rounded up in the run-up to the Congress. The usual suspects have been cleared away already. During the Congress, there will be an almost total clamp down on any independent activities. There will be a shutdown of the VPN services, making it impossible to access the open international internet. And we will see what happens after the Congress. But as I said, I think in the short run, the outlook is not really very good.
Do you want to comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer I'm going to give is a little bit ironic. To make the Party Congress useful for human rights, we shall make it worse for human rights first. You know why? It's dialectic. Because it is getting worse, a lot. Not only for a period of time that I've mentioned under Xi Jinping's rule, but when time approaches the Party Congress itself, or right after that, the human rights condition within China is getting very, very bad, because a lot of political activists have been isolated, or they have been forced to be tourists around the country, not being able to stay at home, particularly those people in Beijing. They are forced to travel outside Beijing, So all of this kind of, including, as I mentioned, the Taiwanese NGO activists being disappeared within China. So my point is, for such a Party Congress to take place, they are getting human rights conditions both within and without China much worse, so that the world is alarmed. To respond Mr. Guowen's point, the whole world should be alarmed. The nature of the regime, particularly in this part of the world, that when China is expanding its economic and political influence, be alarmed of the nature of that regime and its intention. Even though this region is that remote from that regime, its intention will not become thinner. It's always there. It's always there. So please do not treat that regime as an ordinary trade partner. Please do not be that naive. Because when you're doing that, you are harming your own interest. You are harming the interest of global solidarity for democracy and human rights. So, educated public is the beginning. That is the way we make use of this Party Congress, to be useful for human rights.
Okay. Further questions? A microphone here, please.
Thank you. My name is William Crawley from the University of London. The public reliance that President Trump has been placing on the Chinese leadership to do something about North Korea has been taken as a sign of increasing China's influence, weakening America, but also the fact that nuclear tests are taking place close to Chinese soil, and many more of them. Surely the fact that the Chinese leadership doesn't seem to be able to do anything about North Korea either is a sign of weakness on their part.
Well, I think it's...
What's the last part of the question? Is that a sign of...
A weakness on their part. And my question is...
Weakness of the Chinese regime?
A weakness of Chinese influence on North Korea. If they can't do anything about the nuclear tests on their doorstep.
Okay. Okay. Should we?
Yeah, I think you are the right one to... or
collect more questions?
Okay. So let's collect more questions. Yeah.
Oh, hello. Hello. My name is Ivana Karaskova. I'm a research fellow with the Association for International Affairs based here in Prague. My question goes back to the 19th Party Congress. I would like to ask all 5 panelists, what would you think would happen after the 19th Party Congress with the age limit? We know that there is an age limit of 68 years for Chinese politicians or people who are in the top echelons of Chinese politics. And more specifically, what do you think would have happened with Mr. Wang Qishan, who is already 69 years old? He is the public face of anti-corruption campaign in China. Thank you.
Okay, let's collect the third question, the gentleman, yeah, and then we will ask the questions. And Yang Tianli maybe also would join us answering the questions.
Well, Jakob von Uxküll, I just returned from China and we worked there, and I feel, I'm sorry to sort of disrupt the consensus here, but I've heard an awful lot of wishful thinking and, conspiracy theories. The debate completely ignores the biggest challenge facing China, and, the biggest human right is, of course, the most important human right is the right to life. And the environmental collapse, the climate collapse, which threatened this, has caused the Chinese leadership now for years to say we need to steer another development path towards an ecological civilization. And President Xi uses the term, says development needs to be based on natural law, as opposed to economic law. And so they're working to build a new story, which of course demands, a strong state, building an ecological civilization, and they face very strong, of course, expectations from the people who've been conditioned to believing that they're all going to have US living standards, which is, physiologically, from the resource point of view, absolutely impossible. So I think, to completely ignore these challenges makes the analysis very superficial. And just one contradiction in the title. You say that, facing expansion and tightening the screws, you see it as part of sort of the same picture. In fact, they're actually quite contradictory, because if you look at the Chinese blogosphere, you quickly become aware that the Chinese people are much more nationalistic than the Chinese government. So the idea that, enhancing and increasing the space for the people to influence policy is going to make China less expansionist. I think the opposite is going to be the case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 4 questions here. One, I think I would start with the age limit, because it's a very simple, I guess Mr. Champing can comment on the age limit. It's a very simple answer.
What?
The age limit of the leadership.
I'm sorry in my opinion, I would say it doesn't matter to. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry for the. 我会说都有可能，但是呢，这不是我不能说它不是最重要的问题。我是说这个在这样一种集权体制下，权力斗争是一直会在发生的。今天王岐山可能因为郭伟贵先生的爆料下去了，但是明天可能会有一个李岐山出来。这个斗争是它对个体来说，或者对个体的那个事实来说，爆料来说是很重要的，但是对这个体制，它会持续下去，它可能不是最重要的。
I don't want to say it is not important, but it is definitely not the most important thing. I mean, the age limit, and anything is possible. Anything is possible within this system. Maybe Mr. Wang Qishan will have to step down because of the revelations of Mr. Guo Wengui. We may hear a little bit more in a few minutes, or maybe not. But within the system, it doesn't make any substantial difference. And this is just an inner adaptation, and a new person will rise there, but it doesn't mean that something substantial will change if the age limit is changed. Yeah.
但最重要的可能比这个王岐山的年龄更重要的是习近平的年龄，或者习近平的未来他能不能持续的把这个权力做下去。
But of course, the most important thing is how long Mr. Xi Jinping will keep his power. Yeah, okay. Is it okay, this answer? Yeah. Yeah. What about the nuclear tests? I mean, maybe Mr. Xi will reply the question regarding the nuclear tests, proving China's weakness as a neighbor to, I mean, Korean nuclear tests.
Can I answer both questions?
Yes.
Very shortly, because I'm very interested in the last one. Regarding the North Korea issue, does that reflect the weakness of the Chinese regime? Well, yes and no. Yes, I mean, we have to be aware. Maybe 80 or 90% of North Korea's not only energy, but a lot of infrastructure or daily livelihood supplies or trade are going through China. So if China, there are multiple ways China can pull the leverage on North Korea. However, if China, by doing that, China will also jeopardize its relationship with North Korea. And if North Korea conditions goes worse, China will have to bear the consequences. So it's not that China does not have leverage, but only that China needs to consider the consequences. Not only that, there is, to keep North Korea to some extent being a little bit provocative to the United States serves China's interests a little bit. But if it goes too far, then it will be counterproductive. So how to strike the balance, I think, is the real challenge. But it does not mean that China does not have leverage. It's only that how to use that or when to use that, to what extent China would like to use that. So allow me to come to the question posed by the gentleman regarding environment. There are two questions. First of all, yes, the current Chinese government have a very robust policy agenda to improve the environment, but that is the response to the worsening condition of the environment. And what caused that? It's still the Chinese government policies, previous policies. So actually, it's remedying the consequences itself has created. That's the first thing. Second, to be being more responsive to the economic challenge does not necessarily require a more dictatorship. There's no relationship between these two things. So to have a strong state is not a necessary condition to fulfill the policy agenda to protect the environment. So that's my response to the first question. Second, regarding nationalism, you talk about the societies being more nationalistic than the government. That depends. Sometimes the government encourages nationalism, and the reason why the Chinese society is so nationalistic, actually, again, is a consequence of the long-term patriotism education policy of the government itself. And you say, since the government is constraining the social nationalism, if you let that go, then it will be expensive. My answer is yes and no. That's one kind of expansion. But while constraining the social nationalism does not mean that the state itself does not have its own agenda of being expansionist. So we're talking about different kinds of expansionism. If the expansionism or nationalism is under the government's control, then it will be more instrumental to serve the purpose of the government's expansionist policy agenda.
Yeah, okay, I think I still will give a floor to Martin, who follows the blogosphere in China for quite some time, and he may have some comments to this question as well.
So if you follow the Chinese blogosphere for a longer period of time than just one visit, then you would know that the growing nationalism is exactly the result of the manipulation by the censorship. So I don't see any contradiction there at all, and you can actually show it in, over the time how the nationalist discourse has been promoted by excluding any other voices. So if you control the channels, then it's easy to sort of prescribe the message.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have time for one more question. And then we will go back to Mr. Guo Wengui, who wants to say a few words also to our discussion. As it will be interpreted, it will take a little bit more time than our direct responses.
May I respond to the age thing?
Yes, of course. You are welcome.
I haven't thought about that too. My answer is that question is already irrelevant because to start with, the age limit is not written in any document. It's just a tacit consensus. It's only binding as long as people think it's still a consensus. And since now we have a new core of the party, if he says it's not a consensus, it's not a consensus. There is no written rule about that. So I don't think, but of course, I have to say, if you want to break that original tacit rule, tacit consensus, you have to pay some political price. That's for sure. There is a political cost. So if you force me to guess, you are not forcing me, I'm forcing myself to guess about Wang Qishan. Allow me to make an educated guess, so to speak. I think Wang Qishan will not be included in the standing committee list, but he may assume some kind of honorary position, of the state leadership rank, but will not have substantial power. So that is my guess. The reason for that guess is, given all the alleged stories given by Mr. Guo Wengui about Wang Qishan, it will be very, very controversial to keep him within the standing committee list. It's too costly. Doesn't make sense. For anyone to defend him will be very, very costly. So that's one thing. And on the other hand, to totally do away with him will put him in a very risky position because he has so many enemies. If all those enemies will attack upon Wang Qishan, that will have some ramification that actually will be difficult to manage politically. So if I were Xi Jinping, I will keep him in a relatively safe place but without power. That will serve everyone's purpose. So that is the logic of my, so to speak, educated case. Again, I force myself to guess that. Thank you.
Okay. I've just heard that Mr. Chang Ping would still like to comment.
Yes, I have a translate. I think I...
Okay, so I will try to interpret.
很多人认为年龄限制，或者是现在就是现在中共的这个一些制度是邓小平设计的，所以呢，习近平正在背叛邓小平。其实我认为这个事实上不是这样。现在习近平正在沿着邓小平的路，现在的整个体制是邓小平设计的。邓小平设计的就是这个所谓思想基本原则，就是经济改革，然后政治不动，要把我们的权利交给我们的子孙。
Well, in fact, there is an idea that Xi Jinping is reversing the system established by Deng Xiaoping, but I don't believe it is the truth. I think that actually Xi Jinping is fulfilling the Deng Xiaoping's project, his legacy, which means, simply said, to develop economy and not to touch the political power, to keep the political system unchanged and give it over to our children and grandchildren.
所以重点不是哪个人，甚至不是习近平本人如何好或者如何坏，重点是这个制度一直在有效的运行。
And I think the core issue is not whether Xi Jinping is a good or a bad guy. The core issue is that the whole system is wrong.
另外，关于那个朝核的问题，我只说一句：朝鲜问题。朝鲜问题。现在情况其实不是中国没有 力量或者去制约朝鲜，也不是朝鲜被或者中国被美国逼到哪一步。现在的情况就是中国和朝鲜想要的一个结果。这个主动权其实是在这个朝鲜和中国这面，在某种程度上他们是一起。这个美国当然川普除了恐吓之外，目前其实他没有什么办法。如果朝鲜或者中国说我们现在谈判，那他随时可以谈判。
And I would also go back to the Korean issue. I basically think this is not a matter of China's weakness, and actually that China and Korea somehow work closely together, and if they decide to go to negotiations, they would go to negotiations with, or dialogue with the United States.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we will ask Mr. Guo Wengwei, who promised us.
Please, moderator, could I comment 3 minutes?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah. First, Mr. Yang Jianli will make a short comment.
I just want to make a short comment. I think there are quite a few paradoxes existing around Xi Jinping. One, a friend just asked how solid his power will be after Party Congress if there are any challenge facing him. I say, of course, no power is not facing challenges. I think Xi Jinping will face challenges from all directions. But the paradoxical thing is there is no significant challenge seen now. Number 2 paradox is he does not lack enemies, but he himself does not know where his fiercest enemy will be. Number 3, and his power is definitely consolidated and elevated to the status that may be on the equal position with Deng Xiaoping in the history of the party. But if I look around, you can hardly find a social group that vehemently support him. I gave reasons in my opening remarks. I don't want to repeat them. But one thing I want to emphasize, after Tiananmen Square, Chinese Communist Party adopt a very effective policy, which we can say, buying stability policy, which means co-opt the middle class, the private capitalists, and any social elite for that matter into the ruling structure, so that the middle class above would be defenders of this regime. That's how we managed to continue to this day after Tiananmen Square. But that structure is dissolving simply because Xi Jinping is a game changer. He waged anti-corruption campaign in the past 5 years. It's not only because he wanted to do it, because more importantly, it's because he had to do it. Because the ruling model of co-opting the social elite into the ruling structure, exchanging their loyalty to corruption, has becoming unbearably costly. So with economic downturn, I don't think it cannot continue that way any longer. So he has to change the crony capitalism that adopted by Deng Xiaoping. That is why I said Xi Jinping's era will be radically different from that of Deng Xiaoping. As a result, the middle class and private entrepreneurs will turn their back on the regime. That is the deepest crisis facing Xi Jinping, and also an opportunity for us.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we will ask you to interpret for us. We will ask Mr. Guo Wengwei, who promised to say some, as he said, concrete examples to comment or to make his comments. In the end of our panel, he has something like 8 or to 10 minutes. And please, Yang Jianli, interpret for him.
Yeah. 霍文贵先生，请。
现在是我来回答一下那个问题，还是说一下你觉得？
你愿意说什么都可以，回答问题也可以，你讲一些实际的例子也可以，就是。
对，我建议，因为凯透答应了说实际的例子，所以我们非常希望能听到一些实际的例子、具体的例子。
讲一些具体的例子，哎。
我这样，这个刚才听大家讨论的问题都非常的棒。我从开始这个出来爆料到今天，我有个原则，我只说我经历的事情，我不想说任何我猜来或者我想象的事情。
So the discussion was very, very interesting, and as I promised from day one, when I began reviewing the corruption cases of Chinese high-level officials, I made a promise that I only talk about the things that I had experienced. I would not talk about my predictions. Yeah.
这个所有刚才谈到的问题当中，包括过去这些年，这个世界上关注中国的问题的根本，我认为是个错误，就是所有的人，大部分人都相信了中国的各种数据和各种国家政策和各种所谓政治现象，这是真正的灾难，因为那都是假的。
From the previous discussion, I further confirmed that people around the world are continue to make a mistake. That is the trust. They tend to trust the statistics and propaganda that the Chinese government has provided.
我和中国的过去的常委和现任常委们，大多数人都打过交道。我和他们在一起的时候，这个都是谈论很私人的问题。在这些私人的问题讨论当中，我来对比在国际事件上，可不像一些专业人士对中国的判断，很多都是相反的。比如说，
I had interactions with most previous members and the current members of CCP Standing Committee of the Politburo, and we talked about many private matters, and comparing with what the so-called international China expert described and stated and predicted, many things are in great disparity with the reality.
这个北朝鲜的问题美国和世界上都承认的是，中国在北朝鲜每年有这个2.26亿美元或者36亿美元的这个贸易交易，这完全是错误的。北朝鲜的70%的钱全部来自于制造世界上最高级的病毒供应给亚洲，而且中国、香港、台湾、日本是最大的市场。
For example, the North Korea nuclear issue, the international community believes, including the United States and everybody else, that the trade amount between China and North Korea annually is $2.6 billion US. That is totally untrue. And the fact is that about 70% of the income of North Korea, it means the government, from dealing drugs. And these drugs market are in Hong Kong, Japan, and where else, Ms. Guo?
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
那么我在北朝鲜和金家见面的时候，他们奢华的生活。这个10几台劳斯莱斯、10几台新奔驰同时出现，吃的世界上最好的鱼子酱，家里用着最时髦的家具、最先进的电子产品，绝大多数不是买来的，是中国的盗国贼集团他们送给他的，而且是经常的更新。
I had a privilege to have meeting with Kim and his families. I found, they were enjoyed their perks and luxury that people cannot even imagine 10 Rolex and Mercedes, and the best quality food, and all these luxuries, second to none in the world. These things were not bought by him and his family, but given from China as gift.
就这个现象，我回来问一个中国的最高领导人，他怎么看待这个问题的时候，他用了最朴实的语言告诉我：我们每年从美国的贸易当中拿顺差，这个直接的顺差和通过第三国，我们大概要几千亿美元拿过来。我们需要北朝鲜转移美国的视线，我们才能从美国、欧洲能获得一年的这几千亿美元。当时我就是震惊了，因为这是国家的政策，这是所有的外界没有闹明白的。中国需要北朝鲜转移欧洲、美国和日本这样国家的视线，然后来支撑它的所有的在这些欧美和日本这些文明国家来盗取和这个骗取的财富。
When I asked one of the leaders of China about this, about what I had seen in North Korea, this leader answered very honestly. He said, we have annual trade surplus from U.S. a few hundred billion U.S. dollars. But for that, we need to divert U.S. and European countries' attention, to so as to make a benefit from it, to take advantage of it. So we have to use North Korea as an issue to drain their effort and resources and attention, so that we can take advantage of such situation. Otherwise, the few hundred billions U.S. dollar trade surplus would not be possible.
中国当然是这个共产党的体制是真正的灾难的根本，但是我认为中国现在已经是变异了，它已经不是制度的问题了。中国现在这个国家14亿人民已经被这个所谓的红二代们盗国贼集团彻底的绑架，体制在这里已经没有任何意义了。你是什么体制，只要不铲除这盗国贼，他都会绑架14亿人民，他都会成为世界的威胁，因为他要安全，他要继续生存，他必须欺骗全世界，必须威胁全世界。
Of course, the root cause of the disaster is the nature of the system of Chinese government, but that's not only the reason. We have to realize that the second generation of the princelings and so-called kleptocrats, the country stealers, they kidnapped the whole country and 4.1 kleptocrat kidnapped the whole country, the 1.4 billion people, so that they can use this country, use all the resources to their advantage. So we have to realize this fact. And no matter what system that will be, if these people are in power, and the situation will continue.
Okay, so 最后一句。
政党是政党共产党。
他说你最后一句再讲。对。他说时间到了。
时间到了，对不起，最后一句。
最后一句。做个总结，一句话做个总结。
我一句话就是，我觉得知道中国的所有的本质和真相，比一切都重要。
Truth about nature of China is most important, more important than anything else.
Okay, 谢谢.
Thank you.
Well, I think unfortunately our time is over. I thank all the panelists. I thank our guests across the ocean. I thank all the audiences that were here with us. And I think we actually can continue in the next panel. Some of the inputs you heard here maybe further developed in the panel dedicated to the international position of China and international impact of China. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.